Hey guys, tonight we're heading way back to a world where you don't wake up to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the sharp clang of a bell rung by some half-asleep monk. You blink your eyes open to the scent of damp wool, a draft seeping through the cracks of thick stone walls and the soft creak of wooden beams above. You're lying on a straw-stuffed mattress. Don't shift too much or you'll meet the scratchy underside of a flea or two, and the ceiling is decorated with spider webs instead of chandeliers. Welcome to your morning in a medieval manor house. You're not a peasant, not quite a king, but something in between, a feudal lord. And lucky you, because life is pretty good. If you like your wealth in grain, grudging respect, and legally enforced cheese tolls. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You swing your legs off the bed, well, more like maneuver them around the wooden frame, and the rush of cold morning air smacks you awake. Your feet land on a rug that was probably part of a bear once, but now feels like soggy cabbage. You grunt, not because of pain or effort, just because you can. You're a lord after all. Grunting is part of the brand. Today, like most days, you don't have to do much manual labor, or any. Your wealth doesn't come from digging ditches or crafting swords. No, your fortune comes from something far less exciting and far more consistent: rent. Specifically rent in the form of eggs, oats, chickens, and occasionally a barrel of honey or someone's second best pig. The manor house around you isn't exactly Versailles. It's more like a very proud barn with opinions. Stone walls, timber roof, and furniture that screams functional first, splinters second. There's a hall with long wooden tables used for feasting meetings and sometimes trials, where you find someone for fishing in your pond. Your chair at the head of the table. It's not just a seat. It's a symbol of power carved with crests and dragons and uncomfortable authority. You head toward the window. It doesn't have glass, of course, just shutters that squeal open on iron hinges. Outside, the fields are already waking up. Your peasants are tending to your land. That's right, your land. Not because you bought it at some elegant auction, but because it was granted to you by someone even richer in exchange for vague loyalty, and maybe a few soldiers if things got spicy. That smell, it's smoke, manure, and wet hay. But also profit. Every back bent in that field, every calloused hand gripping a hoe means more grain in your storerooms. You sigh contentedly. Feudalism isn't flashy, but it pays. Historians still argue whether feudal lords fully understood the mechanics of their own wealth, if they truly grasped the scale of labor feeding their opulence, or if they just thought they were born lucky and vaguely blessed by God. But here's what's clear: the real work was happening down the hill, and you weren't going to interrupt it. Someone knocks on your door. Not really a knock, more like a gentle scratching followed by a polite throat clear. Your steward, the guy who actually knows how many sheep you own, how many pigs got sick last week, and what to do if someone gets caught brewing beer without permission. You nod. He bows. No words needed. You're important after all. He hands you a slate with numbers etched into wax. Rents collected. Fines paid. One widow offered 3 loaves instead of the standard tithe. You consider it a moment. Maybe she's old. Maybe she's struggling. Maybe you'll be generous today and let it slide. Or maybe you'll tax her geese next week. Fairness is relative. You walk through the manor's great hall. The floor is made of packed earth covered in straw, so it's sort of soft, but also kind of itchy and deeply questionable. The walls are hung with tapestries depicting you winning imaginary battles you never fought. They're propaganda, basically, but cozy. Breakfast. Likely a bowl of pottage, a sort of sad medieval oatmeal that can include grains, vegetables, and the occasional lucky rabbit leg. If you're really feeling luxurious, maybe a bit of cheese. But don't get too excited. Dairy's only appealing when you're not thinking about who churned it and how recently their hands were in a pig trough. You eat in silence. Lords don't make conversation unless it's about money, marriage, or mildew. Speaking of which, a messenger arrives with news from the next manor over something about a land dispute or someone stealing firewood. You'll hear it later in court. Probably find someone, possibly inherit the firewood. And so your day begins. You don't fight in wars. You don't swing swords. You don't even ride your horse unless it's to show off your shiny boots. Your job is simpler and sneakier. You manage wealth, you enforce rights. You stay just distant enough from your peasants that they resent you quietly but still show up for plowing. There's no internet, no stock market, but somehow you're already accumulating assets, land, grain, labor. All without lifting a finger. And it's only Monday. You step out into the morning mist, wool cloak pulled tight around your shoulders. The air is crisp and smells faintly of damp leaves, smoke, and that special something peasants never quite wash off. Your boots squelch in the mud, but it doesn't matter. You're not walking far, you've got a horse. Or more accurately, someone else has a horse that they bring to you saddled, brushed, and suspiciously reluctant because horses in this time period are expensive, temperamental, and not at all romantic. Mounting is a production. You don't just hop on. Someone lowers a stool. Another holds the reins. A third, if they're unlucky, gets kicked. Once you're astride, you feel 10 feet tall. You are now the center of gravity for a whole world that turns around land ownership obligation and a shockingly detailed hierarchy of who's allowed to wear what color of velvet. And where are you going? Not to war. You're off to check your properties. Maybe the mill needs a new wheel. Maybe the vineyard is behind on its harvest. Maybe, let's be honest, you just want to be seen. Because in the feudal world, being visible is half the job. You're a walking reminder of who owns the sheep and who eats the mutton. As you ride past the village huts, you give a slight nod. That's all. A nod, not a wave. Not. Waves are for fairs and royal parades. The peasants stop what they're doing. Some bow. Others pretend not to see you while definitely seeing you. There's tension here. Always is. You live off their labor. They live under your laws. And even if they're loyal today, bad weather or one too many surprise taxes could change that. Still, they need you. Or more accurately, they need the structure you represent. You've got the storage barns, the millwrights, the blacksmith who doesn't charge them directly because you already pay him in grain and favors. This whole economy is a sticky web of obligation. And guess what? You're the spider. You arrive at the granary. It's not impressive, basically a big wooden box with locks, but it's your treasure chest. You dismount. Carefully. Because you've got a bad knee, probably from that one time you trained for battle and fell off a hay bale. Inside, sacks of barley, rye, and wheat are stacked high. This is where your real wealth lives, not in coins, not in silk tunics, but here in the ability to feed people, or more importantly, withhold food. Grain is power. If there's a shortage, you become a savior or a tyrant, sometimes both. You run your hand across the sacks. Sacks sewn shut by hand, dragged here by people who slept in huts with no chimneys. You nod. Good year. Your steward trails behind you holding a wax tablet. The tenantry and barley cross delivered late, he says. You raise an eyebrow. They claim flooding. You grunt. Again. It's your favorite power move. Find them, you mutter. Half a chicken each. Is that fair? Maybe. Maybe not. Historians still argue whether medieval lords truly believed in fairness or just leaned into control dressed up in righteousness. Either way, you're not feeling generous. Your boots are muddy and you haven't had second breakfast. You remount. The horse neighs, possibly in protest, possibly because it hates its life. You share a moment. Neither of you asked for this system, but here you are tied together by hay and hierarchy. As you trot back toward the manor, you pass the mill. The sound of turning wood and grinding stone is oddly soothing. This is another gold mine because you charge people to use it. Not much, just a little. Just enough to remind them that nothing is free. The water wheel spins steadily, powered by a stream that's technically public but really yours. You own the land around it, so the water might as well belong to your ancestors. You dismount again, sighing because stairs would be easier, and enter the mill. It's dark, damp, and smells like warm flour and moss. The miller sees you and stiffens. He's always nervous. You once fined him for shorting your grain. Or maybe you just looked at him too hard. Hard to say. You check the ledger. Numbers etched in charcoal, half smudged but readable. You nod. Satisfactory. Then your steward mumbles something about rights of pasture. Ugh. You forgot about that one. Apparently, some villagers are letting their goats graze too close to the Lord's orchard. Again. You rub your temples. Feudalism isn't all roasted meats and goblets. It's also about micromanaging peasants who think fences are suggestions. You'll have to send someone to scold them, or maybe stage a random inspection where your presence alone makes them nervous enough to move the goats voluntarily. Fear is cheap, enforcement is expensive. As the sun creeps higher, the fields begin to shimmer with heat. Time to head back. You haven't even held court yet. And someone mentioned a pig dispute yesterday, possibly involving accusations of sorcery. You try not to laugh. Pig sorcery is so last century. You ride back in silence. The manor appears on the horizon like a squat, judgmental guardian of tradition. It's not beautiful. It's not comfortable. But it's yours. And it's working. Because while kings make laws and knights make trouble, you make money. Back at the manor, you peel off your gloves, flick some invisible dust off your cloak, and slide into your high-backed wooden chair. The one that creaks like it resents you, which, let's be honest, it probably does. You're not here to rest. Not yet. You're here to hold court. In this case, holding court doesn't mean sipping wine while bards sing your praises. It means listening to the latest complaints from people who smell like sheep, wear the same tunic all year, and think a legal case is shouting louder than your neighbor. You sigh deeply and motion for the steward to begin. First up, a land dispute. Always a land dispute. Two brothers, both with sunburned noses and equally suspicious eyes, argue over who owns the strip of soil between their fields. You nod solemnly while trying not to drift off. One of them references an ancestral agreement made by their great-uncle's neighbor's son who may or may not have existed. You smile faintly. Historians still argue whether these local customs were legitimate law, or just elaborate storytelling contests with pitchforks. You rule in favor of the older brother, not because he's right, but because he brought you a pie last month. And frankly, you remember the pie more fondly than either man's testimony. Next up, someone's been stealing apples from the orchard. Again, it's always the apples. No one ever steals turnips. You scan the group of assembled villagers. One small boy looks very guilty. You raise an eyebrow. He bursts into tears. Case closed. You assign the fine 2 afternoons repairing fences. The villagers nod. They expected worse. One even chuckles. You pretend not to notice. Let them think you're merciful. It keeps things easier. Later, a tenant woman approaches you directly. She's small, wiry, and clearly exhausted. Her husband died in a plowing accident, and she's struggling to meet her dues. You listen. Really listen. Her voice shakes, her hands tremble. You pause, then grant her a deferral. Not forgiveness, heaven forbid, but a delay. You add a gentle warning about staying productive, but it's mostly for show. She nods with something like gratitude. You nod back, heart warmed slightly. Only slightly. This is part of being rich here. Not just having food or land or livestock, but being the gatekeeper of mercy. Generosity is strategic. You never know when you'll need a favor repaid in the form of an extra laborer, or someone who swears they definitely didn't hear you snoring during church. Speaking of church, a monk arrives next. He bows 2 low robes trailing in the dust. He's here about a donation. You groan internally. The monastery wants more grain for the winter. You've already given them 12 sacks. They want 15. You think of your granary, your carefully tallied stores, and the potential for a cold snap. You say yes. Why? Because the church has something you don't: eternal judgment and people who write things down. You'd rather be on their good side. Also, rumor has it the bishop plays chess and you still want a rematch after last spring. You dismiss the monk with a wave. He beams. You've just lost 3 sacks of barley and gained a permanent place on the prayer list. Not a bad trade. As court winds down, your steward presents a final scroll. It's an inventory, boring yes, but critical. It lists your assets like a proud grocery list of medieval capitalism: 2.5 oxen, don't ask, 1 full vineyard, 14 hives of bees. 3 functioning mills, 1 slightly haunted forest lodge, and more chickens than you can count. You glance at the wax seal. It's official. You are in every legal and social sense extremely rich, not in the gold and gems way people imagine, but in the real, exhausting, grinded out on peasant backs way that keeps the system rolling. Your fortune comes from food, not flair. From bread, not battle. People think lords get rich from war. They don't. War is expensive. Horses die. Armor dents. Ransoms don't always pay. You can't plant a sword in the ground and grow cabbages, but peasants? They're consistent. Give them a patch of dirt and a rude calendar of feast days and they'll generate wealth faster than any conquest. Still, you sometimes wish things were simpler. You dream occasionally of a life without tax rolls, livestock diseases, or peasants who think goat theft is a prank. Maybe you'd be a brewer, or a traveling lute player. Then you remember how much you hate sleeping on straw and being rained on. Evening approaches. The manor quiets. Your wife, who is probably much smarter than you but extremely bored, asks if you'll be attending the harvest festival. You say yes, not because you enjoy dancing, but because it's good optics. Lords who show up at festivals rarely get surprised with pitchforks. Outside, the sun slants low across your fields. Golden light touches every furrow, every fence, every corner of land you own. It's beautiful, and it's yours. But only as long as you keep the machine running, keep the people working, keep the grain moving. Your wealth isn't stored in boxes, it's scattered across acres and stomachs and favors owed. You smile faintly and head to the pantry. You're hungry. Maybe there's some of that pie left. You wake up before dawn the next day, not because you have to, but because your steward's rooster is obnoxiously punctual and you've long suspected it takes personal pleasure in ruining your dreams. You roll out of your wool-stuffed mattress with a grunt, stretch your back with a chorus of snaps, and light the small oil lamp by your bedside. The room flickers to life shadows dancing against stone walls still chilled from the night. As lord of the manor, your days don't start with meditation or gentle tea. No, they begin with spreadsheets. Well, medieval spreadsheets. Which is to say, long lists on parchment covered in ink smudges and abbreviations that only your steward seems to understand. Today's list: wool, salt, and pigs. Always pigs. You wander down to the solar, where your steward already waits with a scroll in one hand and a goblet of mead in the other. It's too early for mead, but he insists it helps him remember numbers. You pretend not to notice the slight wobble in his stance. The wool tally is promising. Your sheep have been sheared, their fleece bundled into sacks and sent to town to be sold. This, more than any battlefield conquest, is your secret weapon. Wool is the gold of the Middle Ages. Everyone wants it, merchants, tailors, even bishops with suspiciously fine robes. You imagine a trader in Bruges running his hands through your wool right now, thinking he's struck rich. Joke's on him. You already did. Historians still debate how much medieval wealth truly flowed from wool. Some say it transformed entire economies. Others argue it merely lined a few lordly pockets. You lean toward the former because, frankly, your pockets are lined and they're lined with sheep fluff. Salt is next. A shipment just arrived from the coast, dusty and crusted but precious. You store it in sealed barrels guarded like treasure. It's not just for flavor, it preserves meat flavors, cheese, and if rumors are true, can even ward off demons. You've never tested that last part, but it's good to have options. You consider selling half the shipment to nearby estates, but decide to hold off. A hard winter is coming and salted pork waits for no man. Pigs, meanwhile, continue their campaign of chaotic existence. 3 escaped last night and terrorized the herb garden. You suspect the pigs know exactly what they're doing. They're fat, smug, and deliciously profitable. When sold whole or smoked, each pig brings in enough silver to fund a week's worth of ale and repairs to the leaky roof. You glance outside and see one trotting smugly near the moat. It pauses, makes eye contact, then casually knocks over a potted plant. You squint. That pig's days are numbered. After breakfast, bread, cheese, and something pretending to be fruit, you stroll through your lands. Not for leisure, but for inspection. Fields of barley ripple in the breeze. Vineyards twine lazily along the hillside. Everything looks pleasingly productive. You pause near the windmill where 2 boys are hauling sacks of grain. One is barefoot. You make a note to issue him shoes that'll win favor with his family, and besides, no one wants blood in the flour. The miller greets you with flour-dusted hands and nervous eyes. He's behind quota again. You nod thoughtfully and tell him to work faster. He nods even more quickly. Problem solved. Along the path, you pass the tannery where the smell hits you like a slap made of rotten eggs and despair. You don't linger. Tanners are valuable, yes, but they smell like they've lost every argument with life. Next comes the brewery. You like the brewery. It's warm, smells like toasted bread and sour apples, and the brewmaster always greets you with a cheerful nod and a tankard. You sip. It's strong, possibly too strong. You order 2 barrels sent to the castle anyway. Your cellar looks better with them. So do your evening conversations. By midday, you're back at the manor with parchments spread across the long oak table. Rent collections are due. You don't handle it directly, heavens no, but you supervise. Your bailiff reads out names and peasants shuffle forward like nervous school children. Most pay in kind grain, eggs, firewood. One man offers a large wheel of cheese. You inspect it. It's shockingly good. You grant him a week's leniency out of sheer admiration. You jot down mental notes: who's late, who's thriving, who might have a sick cow they're hiding. It's like medieval reality TV, but with more mud and fewer confessions. Afterward, you retreat to the study. You've got a letter from a merchant in Venice who wants to trade spices for timber. Tempting. You scribble a reply in Latin that's only half accurate and seal it with wax, hoping your terrible penmanship won't offend. You think back to your father, who believed money only came from sword points and taxes. You've gone beyond that. You've invested diversified, whispered deals behind closed doors. You don't just own land. You work it like a chessboard. Your power grows quietly like ivy wrapping around stone. As the sun sets, you sit by the fire, boots off, drink in hand, content. You've made no conquests today, no battles. But your granaries are full. Your tenants paid your pigs slightly less smug, and your wool already halfway to a cathedral tapestry. Wealth, it turns out, doesn't always march. Sometimes it meanders, sometimes it bleats, and sometimes it snorts and tramples your time. The next morning rolls around and you don't even flinch when the rooster screams again. It's almost comforting now, like a reliable villain in a bad play. You sit up, stretch your arms, and glance out the narrow stone window. The fog clings low over your estate, and it smells of damp earth smoke and the faint tang of manure. A lovely day for managing tenant complaints, you suppose. Your steward is already pacing in the great hall when you arrive, clutching another scroll like it's a death sentence. "My lord," he says dramatically, "we have a manure issue." Of course you do. It's not just a smell issue, though it is, absolutely that. It's that your tenants have been overusing the communal waste pit again, and it's now threatening to leak into the barley field, which, as your steward puts it, would turn next month's beer into a public hazard. You sigh and make a mental note to double-check where the drainage ditches are leading. Farming, after all, is delicate work. You might be a feudal lord, but today you're also a part-time sewage engineer. You trudge outside toward the fields. The peasants are already at work, bending, hoeing, shouting, singing off-key. One older woman sees you approach and immediately bows, holding out a wooden bowl with turnips. Just turnips. No explanation. You take them because you're not sure what else to do. They're warm. The villagers have a habit of offering you strange gifts. Last week, someone left a basket of goose feathers on your doorstep. No note, just feathers. You assume it's gratitude. Or maybe a subtle curse. Hard to tell in these parts. You spend the morning inspecting boundaries. The land's fertility is your lifeline, so you walk the edges, check the hedgerows, and glance at the river. It's running a little high from the recent rains, and part of the northern pasture is soggy. Your steward suggests building a small dike, but you shake your head better to wait and see if the weather changes. No need to invest in mud moving just yet. As you pass the manor's apiary, yes, you keep bees now, because why not? You notice something odd. The hives are unusually quiet. The beekeeper, a man with more stings than teeth, informs you the bees are in a mood. You nod solemnly as if this is a deeply scientific observation. Bees, like your tenants, are temperamental, but their honey sells well in town, especially around festival season. You instruct the beekeeper to leave an offering of lavender near the hives. Superstition or not, it can't hurt. Now comes the less pleasant part of the day, resolving tenant disputes. You settle into the hall as your bailiff ushers them in one by one like peasants on parade. First up, two brothers arguing over who owns a particularly fat goose. Both claim it waddled from the other's yard. You ask how they can be sure it's the same goose, and one of them says it honks with an accent. You make them split the value of the goose in grain because, honestly, you're not paid enough to decode poultry dialects. Next comes a woman who insists her neighbor's pigs have been digging up her root vegetables at night. The accused neighbor shrugs and says the pigs go where they're called. This implies sorcery, or at least well-trained pigs, and either way you're intrigued. You rule that both parties must fence their gardens. Problem solved. Sort of. There's a rhythm to all of this, the disputes, the bartering, the quiet moments when someone leaves you a hand-woven scarf or a dozen eggs. You're not just a landowner, you're a referee, a banker, a therapist, and sometimes, apparently, a goose whisperer. After a lunch of bread, cold meat, and one of those mystery turnips, which was surprisingly sweet, you meet with your reeve to discuss taxes. Not just collecting them, but managing them. You need silver to trade with merchants to repair the roof of the east wing and to bribe that bishop into blessing your wine cellar. But you can't squeeze the peasants too hard. Hungry tenants don't farm well, and angry ones have pitchforks. You review the numbers. Wheat yields are up, but egg production is down. There was a fox incident, apparently. You nod, wondering if you should look into acquiring a better fence or a less traumatized henhouse. You also discuss barter logistics. One tenant wants to pay part of their rent in candles. Handmade beeswax candles, to be fair, but still it's going to clutter up your storage room. You agree mostly because the candles smell nice and your steward has a fondness for them. It's the small luxuries. Historians still argue whether medieval bartering systems truly functioned smoothly or were just an elaborate way to avoid dealing with silver. From your perspective, it's both. Money is convenient, sure, but have you ever traded a jug of honey for a fur-lined cloak? Highly satisfying. As the afternoon wanes, you check on your falconer. Not because falconry brings in any income, but because it makes you feel powerful. The birds are majestic, and when guests visit, nothing says wealth like a hawk swooping dramatically onto your gloved hand. The falconer tries to teach you some commands, but the bird seems to prefer ignoring you. You name it justice. Ironic considering how often it poops on the guards. You finish the day by overseeing preparations for the harvest festival. It's still weeks away, but planning is everything. Banners need mending, the beer must be brewed, and the fiddler needs to be paid in advance. This time last year, he vanished halfway through a song. You assign tasks, approve a roasting pig, and suggest a poetry contest. Everyone groans. As you return to your chambers, the manor glows in torchlight, and the distant sound of laughter rolls in from the village. You pause. For all the squabbling, the smells, and the goose-based legal cases, there's a certain harmony here. You don't rule with fear. You rule with mild confusion and a keen sense of accounting. You climb into bed. 1 pig, 50 eggs, 4 sacks of barley, and 1 very judgmental falcon. It's been a productive day. The morning mist rolls back like a theater curtain, revealing another busy stage of life on your estate. Today, it's not just your usual village management chaos. No, today's a market day, which means you'll need your most presentable tunic, your least muddy boots, and most importantly, your pretending to enjoy bartering face. You don't technically need to go to the village market. You could send your steward, but let's be honest, he has the charisma of damp wool, and the villagers prefer dealing with someone who occasionally cracks a smile, or at least grunts in a vaguely cheerful manner. You make your way downhill, passing your flock of sheep. They glance at you with the same expression they've had for centuries, vague indifference. Still, they're valuable, especially for wool production. Historians still argue whether the feudal wool economy was more profitable than grain. What's not up for debate is that your estate's wool is soft enough to tempt even the pickiest merchants. At the market square, the noise hits you like a jug of mead to the face. Chickens squawk, children scream, old women shout prices like battlefield commands. It's an orchestra of organized disorder. You find it oddly soothing. Your tenants have set up stalls in neat, semi-neat rows. There's breadcloth-cured meats, beeswax candles, and an impressive display of root vegetables. You spot your favorite oversized onions that could double as blunt weapons. You mentally note to try bartering for a few later. But first business, you're here to collect stall fees and make a few high-stakes trades of your own. A traveling merchant waves you down. He smells of cloves and ambition. He opens his cart with a flourish, revealing spices, fine linens, and oh yes, tiny glass bottles of perfume. You pick one up, sniff it, and promptly sneeze. It smells like someone tried to trap a flower in vinegar. He offers you a nobleman's discount, which naturally is the same as the normal price, but with more hand gestures. You play along. Eventually, you trade 2 bolts of local wool for a small bottle of oil said to be from the East. Whether that's true or not is irrelevant. It smells pleasant and gives your bed linens just enough flair to remind your guests you're not entirely provincial. Your steward, meanwhile, is deep in negotiation over 3 crates of apples. You glance over and realize he's somehow been talked into buying a barrel of pickled fish. No one eats pickled fish in your village. You make a mental note to reassign him to bookkeeping next week. A young blacksmith offers you a horseshoe in exchange for permission to court one of your maidservants. You raise an eyebrow, ask him if the shoe is enchanted, and when he says no, you tell him to bring a second one next time. Romance, after all, should cost at least a pair. There's a fringe performer playing a flute near the fountain. His song is haunting, at least it haunts your eardrums. You toss him a coin just to move along. Back at your informal inspection table, a barrel with a cloth on it, you receive a few tenant requests. One wants permission to build a second chicken coop. Another wants to know if she can sell pies using your family crest on the crusts. You ask what's in the pies. She says meat. You wisely decline the branding opportunity. Midday hits and the smell of roasted meat lures you toward the food stalls. You accept a wooden plate piled with sausages and boiled greens. One bite tells you the meat is fresh and probably from that goat you were suspiciously missing last week. You eat it anyway. It's delicious. A troop of monks arrives collecting alms and selling herbal remedies. One offers you a concoction he claims cures melancholy. It smells like mud and old wine. You thank him politely and pass. Then just as you're about to call it a day, a commotion erupts. Two merchants are arguing loudly over a spilled barrel of eels. Yes, eels. One claims the other knocked it over on purpose to steal attention from his spice table. The other says he's allergic to eels and wouldn't touch them. You intercede mostly because the smell is turning stomachs across 3 stalls. You order them both to clean it up, find them each a loaf of bread, and assign the eels to the nearest soup maker. Crisis resolved, mostly. As the sun dips lower, you buy a clay jug of cider and sip slowly, watching your tenants haggle, flirt, and shout. Market day isn't just commerce, it's community. It's how stories spread, marriages are arranged, and rumors about your falcon's love life somehow get started. You head back toward the manor with a donkey in tow, an unexpected trade after someone offered it in exchange for your old tapestry of St. Wulfstan. You never liked that tapestry anyway. Too many eyes. You pass a pair of kids playing with sticks, fencing like tiny knights. One of them pauses to bow to you, then resumes trying to knock the other into a pile of mud. Future nobility, you think, or future tax collectors. Once inside, you drop your new perfume bottle on your dresser, hang your slightly smoked tunic to air out, and wash your hands in a basin of rose water. Your steward tries to report the market's final earnings, but you wave him off. Tomorrow is soon enough for ledgers and numbers. Tonight is for cider and quiet. You sit by the hearth watching the fire crackle, sipping slowly from your cup. You've got 10 onions, 1 bottle of questionably Eastern oil, and a donkey that refuses to climb stairs. But you've also got a village that works a manor that stands, and enough wool to sleep through the winter twice over. You did good, Lord of the Onions. The donkey stares at you again this morning. You're not sure what he wants, probably revenge for making him carry onions yesterday, but you toss him a carrot and move on. Because today's not a market day. Today is a state review day. It's time to check what actually makes your wealth grow while you sleep land. And not just the pretty bits near your manor. You're off to visit the outer fields, the woods, and yes, the slightly terrifying marsh at the edge of your property that might or might not be haunted by a goose. You saddle your horse, adjust your cloak, and set out with your steward and a very bored scribe in tow. The first stop is the grain fields, those gentle golden waves that feed not only your people but also your coffers. Your tenants have been growing barley and wheat here since your grandfather's time. And while yields vary, they're usually enough to fill your granary and still leave plenty for trade. Historians still debate whether feudal landowners truly understood crop rotation, but you do thanks to that one monk who wouldn't shut up about legumes. You spot a group of peasants tilling the soil, their backs bent, their feet caked in dirt, and their conversation entirely about turnips. You dismount and chat with the village elder. He complains that the rains came late, that the moles are back, and that someone's cow keeps sneaking into his barley patch. You nod sagely and suggest putting a bell on the cow. He looks at you like you've just invented fire. Your steward takes notes, though, mostly of things like elder smells like onions and possible mole uprising. He's trying, bless him. Next, you ride to the woodlands, a vital source of income and resources. Timber is valuable, but so are mushrooms, herbs, and the occasional illicit truffle-sniffing pig. You remind your men not to overharvest wood regrows slowly, and you don't want to anger whatever forest spirit the villagers swear watches the oaks. One of your guards swears he saw a glowing squirrel last week. You tell him to drink less cider. You pause at a clearing where charcoal burners have set up a smoky camp. The acrid smell hits you like betrayal. But it's necessary. Charcoal fuels blacksmiths, cooks, and those suspicious traveling alchemists who swear they're turning lead into gold. You collect a small bag of coins from the burners. It's not much, but every little bit adds up when you're the lord of 400 acres, and everyone pays a tiny toll to use it. Further out lies the marsh. Oh, the marsh. A wet, buzzing mess of reeds, frogs, and invisible horrors that somehow always get into your boots. You don't go in, of course. You observe from a very safe distance while a local trapper explains that the leeches are extra large this season. Delightful. Still, marshes are oddly valuable. People harvest rushes here for thatching, and the local herbalist insists the stink root plant she finds near the stagnant pool can cure fevers. You've never tried it. She says that's why you're still alive. By now the sun's high and your cloak is less noble and more portable sauna. You strip it off and tie it to the saddle while sipping tepid wine from a skin your steward insists is vintage. It tastes like regret, but at least it's wet. Your next stop is the old orchard, a grove of apple trees so gnarled they look like they could tell ghost stories. This orchard was planted 100 years ago, and despite the occasional worm uprising, it still produces enough fruit to keep your cider cellar from weeping. You allow the tenants to keep a share, of course. You're not a monster. Just a mildly annoyed landlord with seasonal allergies. The last stop is the manor's fish pond. Built generations ago, it's stocked with carp fat enough to be considered noble themselves. Your steward makes a note about fencing it better. Last week, 3 children accidentally fell in while chasing a duck. The duck remains at large. Along the way, you pass tenant cottages, small chapels, and a weirdly well-organized pile of rocks that your scribe insists might be ancient. You let him believe it. Gives him something to write about other than onions and cows. By mid-afternoon, you've gathered more than sunburns. You've assessed what needs repairing, what's thriving, and where to invest next. Your wealth doesn't come from treasure chests or dragon hoards. It grows slowly like moss on stone. Rent from peasants' fees, from traders, harvest yields and tithes from church lands under your patronage. That's the secret most don't realize. It's not conquest that makes a lord rich. It's patience, dirt, and a lot of ledgers. You ride back to the manor with a head full of ideas and boots full of marsh water. The steward rambles about tax collection schedules. The scribe asks if he can write an epic about the glowing squirrel. You agree, but only if the squirrel sings. Once home, you rinse your feet in a wooden tub, toss your cloak into the sun to dry, and sit under the shade of your favorite tree with a wedge of cheese and some cold bread. You nibble slowly, watching the breeze ripple through your lands. Your wealth is humble by some standards. You don't own a castle or have a private army, but your people are fed, your books are balanced, and your goose-haunted marsh is well still haunted, but at least profitable. And in this world, that's not just rich. That's legendary. You wake the next day to the sound of a rooster who believes he's the town crier. He's wrong, of course. You don't pay him in grain or respect, but he does keep a strict schedule. You stretch, brush the crumbs from yesterday's cheese off your tunic, and prepare for a different kind of labor. Today it's about people. Not peasants, not priests, merchants. Yes, those suspiciously cheerful travelers who never have dirt under their fingernails and always know how much things cost. Because while your fields grow barley and your woods grow mushrooms, your real liquid wealth flows from trade, and it's time to meet the men who keep it moving. You saddle up and ride to the market square on the edge of your domain where the tents are already up and someone's shouting about eels. Always eels. You stroll through the stalls with the air of a man who might buy something but probably won't. You touch everything, squeeze a pear, sniff a bolt of cloth, stare at some pottery like it owes you money. Your steward follows behind, muttering things like "too much for mustard" and "do not engage the juggler." You ignore him naturally. At the fish stall, you see fresh trout brought in from the river fish you technically own since the river runs through your land. The merchant gives you a respectful nod and a small discount. You make a note to charge him for the use of the bridge next month. That's fair, right? Over at the cloth tent, a woman unrolls dyed linen in shades of blue-green and something she calls noble gray. You buy a few yards not because you need them, but because it keeps the merchant in business, and a living merchant is a taxable merchant. Historians still argue whether feudal lords understood economics or just faked it well enough to get paid. You pass the spice vendor. His goods are locked in a tiny wooden box like precious treasure. Nutmeg, cinnamon, clove, worth more than your oldest cow and definitely more delicious. You don't buy, but you let him stay on your land for a cut of his sales. That's the game. Provide protection infrastructure and a decent bathroom bush and take a share in return. A few stalls down, a tinsmith is hammering out spoons. Real metal spoons. You remember when your great-uncle insisted they were the devil's ladle. You buy a set just to spite his ghost. Then there's the leather merchant. He smells like hard work and vinegar, but his boots last forever. You compliment his craftsmanship and he beams. Relationships matter. The better you treat your tenants and traders, the more they trust you and the more they tell you when someone's cheating or planning to elope with your falconer. Nearby, a group of traveling merchants sets up with bright banners and fake smiles. They've come from a city, maybe even another kingdom, and they bring news, gossip, and stuff you can't pronounce. Your steward eyes them like they're about to commit tax evasion, which, to be fair, they probably are. But you allow them in anyway. Why? Because for every weird dried fruit or mystery salve they sell, they spend silver in your taverns, they rent stalls, they pay bribes, temporary hosting fees, and they spread your manor's name across the region. Branding, you see. Long before logos, there was the noble crest burned into the brain of every person who bought a fine barrel of your cider. Speaking of barrels, you stop at the cooper's booth. His barrels hold the cider that fuels your seasonal profits. You discuss stave curvature like it's high art. The scribe who tags along writes, "Lord debates barrel souls." Close enough. As midday hits, you retreat to the shade of the central oak tree and sip weak wine from a pewter cup. Around you, trade buzzes, coins clink, children scream, pigs disapprove of everything. You let it all wash over you. A younger noble from another estate arrives. He's wearing velvet, in summer, bold. He asks if you'd like to buy his cousin's goat breeding rights. You pretend to consider it. You know the cousin, he once got stuck in a well. You decline politely and instead offer him a cider contract. He hesitates, then agrees. That's how deals are made, not in war councils. In moments like this, with sweaty velvet and lukewarm drinks, the afternoon wears on. You visit the tavern just to check on things, of course, and watch as a group of farmers debate whether to spend their harvest bonus on more tools or one really good wheelbarrow. You lean in and suggest, "Get both. Split the cost." They blink. You've just invented rural microfinancing, kind of. Trade isn't always grand. It's sacks of oats, pigs on ropes haggling over soap. But it moves money faster than crops or taxes ever could. Every little transaction, every carrot swapped for a comb sends a tiny ripple through your economy. And you You're the pond they all splash in. You walk back to your manor with dust on your boots and a ledger in your head. The steward babbles about toll adjustments. The scribe hums a song about spoon taxes. The merchants pack up and the sun casts long golden lines across your land. You didn't fight a war today. You didn't collect a ransom. You just watched people do what they've always done: buy, sell, barter, swap. And you skimmed a little off the top as lords do. And somehow, that made you richer. The next morning you wake to the soft clatter of coins not raining from the sky sadly, but being counted by your steward in the room below. You roll over, scratch your ear, and consider the greatest secret of feudal wealth: land rent. It's not sexy. It doesn't come with sword fights or ballads. But oh, does it pay? See, you don't just own land. You own everything on the land. Fields, trees, bushes with berries you pretend not to tax. And most importantly, you own the right to let others use it for a fee. That's what rent is. And in the medieval economy, it's the closest thing to printing money. You dress slowly with the exaggerated dignity of someone who doesn't have to be anywhere fast. The peasants, by contrast, have been up since the first chickens sneeze, sweating over grain bundles and praying their thatch roofs don't cave in during the next rain. You're about to sit at a large table and nod meaningfully as people tell you what you already know. Your bailiff presents the ledgers. He smells faintly of parchment and defeat. You flip through them with practiced disinterest. Each entry is a story the miller's cousin finally paid the full rye quota. The smith's apprentice added a goat to his lease. Old Walter, rest his soul, didn't make it to rent day and has left his shack to his slightly less wrinkled nephew. You pencil in raise rate. Historians still argue whether most lords understood the complex rent systems or whether they just relied on experienced stewards and a strong glare. You pretend to understand every line. You've mastered the art of frowning at random intervals to seem thoughtful. Rent comes in 3 flavors. First, there's labor rent, where peasants owe you a chunk of their week in work, plowing your fields, fixing your fences, occasionally catching your drunk falconer. Then there's produce rent, where they give you a set portion of whatever they grow or raise. That's why your cellar smells like turnips 10 months a year. And finally, there's cash rent, the crown jewel. Cold, hard coins, the kind that jingle when you walk and impress visiting nobles. It's rarer because most peasants don't have coins. But those who do, you mark them down for a chat about future expectations. Rent also isn't just about houses. If someone grazes sheep on your hill, that's a grazing fee. If they pick apples in your orchard, that's a picking tax. If they use your mill to grind flour, you charge them for the privilege of not using a rock. Even passing through your land with a cart of firewood, yes, that's toll-worthy. You step outside and wander the edge of your manor. There's a hut made of mud and hope with a garden that's mostly weeds and one angry goose. The tenant greets you nervously. You smile warmly. Then you ask whether he's considered clearing the southern patch for barley. He nods too quickly. That land's now worth more. Rent increase pending. Further on, you stop by a small grove. It's full of mushrooms. Technically wild. But growing on your roots, you place a wooden sign with your crest. Congratulations. You've invented exclusive foraging rights. A passing monk eyes the sign, shrugs, and pretends he didn't just pocket 3 chanterelles. You return home for a quick lunch, bread, cheese, and smugness. The steward brings more ledgers. You feign exhaustion, but secretly you love it. Numbers are like little spells. They tell you who's thriving, who's hiding wealth, and who's one sheep away from begging. You raise some rents, lower others. Not because you're kind, because stable tenants pay longer. By late afternoon, the collectors ride out. They wear your colors, carry your seals, and possess the social charm of wet parchment. They knock on doors, accept coins, flour sacks, occasionally a wheel of questionable cheese. You don't go with them, of course. Lords don't collect rent. Lords receive reports. That evening you host a tiny feast. A roasted pheasant, a jug of cider, a bard who's clearly being paid in leftovers. One of your friends, a fellow lord with far too many buttons on his tunic, asks about your financial strategy. You lean back, take a sip, and say, "Rent's been good this year." He sighs, says his peasants are lazy. You raise an eyebrow. Lazy peasants don't exist, just underfed ones, or overtaxed, or occasionally buried under snow. You suggest he let them forage in the woods for winter fuel. He scoffs. You smile. More rent for you then. The truth is, rent is the quiet engine of your estate. Wars may gain you land, trade may bring in sparkle, but rent is steady. It doesn't need battles. It needs boundaries, barns, and a reasonable fear of eviction. And while scholars still debate whether feudal lords were generous patrons or calculated landlords, you know your role somewhere in between with better shoes. As the fire crackles and the bard drifts into a melancholy song about a chicken who ran away from love, you stare into the flames. Another month of rent safely tucked away in the manor's strongbox. Coins for candles, wheat for winter, and the sweet, boring rhythm of wealth flowing quietly uphill. You wake the next day to the sound of a knock, 3 firm raps from your steward, followed by the soft squeak of hesitation. He's holding a scroll. That means one thing, a charter request. Someone wants rights to graze, to hold a market, to fish in your pond, and they're willing to pay. Oh, this day just got interesting. Charters, dear listener, are like golden tickets, but with fewer dancing factory workers and more goat hair. In the feudal world, they are how you turn intangible authority into tangible money. When a village wants to hold a weekly market, they need your permission. You're not a king, but you're king enough in this neck of the woods. You stretch, yawn theatrically, and allow your steward to read. A nearby hamlet wants to build a bridge and charge travelers a toll. They're asking your approval. You nod slowly, not because you're thoughtful, but because you're calculating how to make it yours. Historians still argue whether charters empowered the peasantry or simply monetized their every breath. It depends on who wrote the history, the monk with ink-stained fingers or the merchant who bought the ink. You sign the scroll with your mark, a tidy little symbol halfway between a noble crest and a smug doodle. You'll take 20% of all tolls collected on that bridge. You've never built a bridge in your life, but now you own a share of one. That's medieval capitalism, baby. Back in your solar, the steward brings more requests. The village baker wants exclusive rights to run an oven. You frown. Didn't she burn down half the lane last spring? He shrugs. Still bakes a good loaf. You approve the request, but add a clause: 1 in 5 loaves goes to your pantry. Your servants will be very full, or very tired of rye. Then there's the fish pond. A cluster of peasants wants to stock it with carp and charge outsiders to fish. You're charmed by their optimism. The pond is more mud than water, but it's your mud and now it's profitable. You agree provided they build a fence and give you the first 5 carp. You stroll out mid-morning to inspect your chartered assets. The baker's already set up a new oven, proudly puffing smoke and self-confidence. The pond now has a rude little sign, "Fishing by permission only." You laugh. It's ugly, but legally it's yours. On your way back, you meet a merchant from a distant town. He's brought velvet and vinegar and wants to set up a stall. You squint. His boots are too clean, but his coins are real. You grant a 3-day license, charge him a silver piece, and invite him to dinner. Rich strangers are always good company, especially when they don't realize how bad your wine is. At lunch, you eat slowly, savoring roasted rabbit in mild triumph. You're not taxing people, you're granting opportunity. That's the official line. You're creating structure, order, and maybe a little oppression, sure, but mostly structure. Your steward returns. He's fidgeting. The villagers want a festival, he says, 3 days. Music, dancing, possibly a puppet show. You raise an eyebrow, and he clears his throat. They'll charge for ale and pies, and they're willing to pay you a portion. Now that's different. You approve the charter and request the first slice of pie, for quality control, of course. Scholars debate whether lords encouraged local economies or simply leached off them. The truth is, they did both. You're doing both, and you feel great about it. Evening rolls around and your manor fills with chatter. The merchant is drunk. The baker is giddy. The puppet troupe has arrived early and is rehearsing a very unflattering impression of you behind the barn. You ignore it. You've seen worse. At least they got your hat right. You raise a toast to enterprise and take a long sip of cider. Every charter you've signed today means a new trickle of coins flowing steadily toward your coffer. Markets, bridges, pies, puppets. You haven't drawn a sword in years, but your power has never been sharper. And as you step onto the balcony, the night wind carrying laughter and lute music, you realize something else. Being a feudal lord isn't just about owning land. It's about owning the rules and charging everyone else to play the game. The morning after the puppet show, you wake to distant shouting, nothing panic, just the rhythmic bark of commerce. That's right, it's market day. And today, you're not just the landlord. You're the landlord who gets paid every time someone sneezes near a turnip stand. You throw on your softest cloak, the one that says I tax you gently, and make your way toward the village square. Feudal lords like you didn't get rich from farming, not really. You inherited farmland, yes, but making money off it took a different kind of genius. The kind that sets up a weekly market, then quietly takes a percentage of every cheese wheel, every chicken, every bootlace sold under your banners. As you step into the square, the smell hits first roasted onions, fresh manure, someone boiling cabbage like it owes them rent. You nod graciously at vendors hawking their goods. There's that tanner from 2 villages over, the one who always looks suspiciously cheerful. And next to him, the brewer who insists her ale cures headaches. It doesn't. It causes them. But who are you to argue with a thriving local economy? You wander through the booths, hands behind your back like a philosopher in sandals. Everyone smiles just a bit too wide. After all, it's your permission that allows this to happen. They know the rules. And you know that every copper they earn contains a tiny fraction that will inevitably find its way back to you. One scholarly debate persists to this day. Did lords like you nurture trade out of benevolence or because it meant passive income with zero risk of sword wounds? Most agree it was the latter, though you occasionally throw a coin to a juggler to keep up appearances. Mid-morning, you visit the tax collector's table, more a sturdy barrel with ink stains and attitude. He's recording sales, collecting stall fees, and scribbling totals with grim determination. We're up 3 hens, 5 sacks of barley, and 2 jars of honey, he reports. You raise your eyebrows, no shoes. He shrugs. The cobbler's sick. You nod sagely, already calculating whether a cobbler-free market day merits a partial fee refund. Spoiler, it doesn't. Nearby, a boy wrestles with a stubborn goose that refuses to be sold. You chuckle. Charge extra, you mutter, for temperament. The vendor overhears and actually does it. The goose sells within the hour. Somewhere Adam Smith just rolled over in his hypothetical grave. Then comes the bell, the market signal for high noon. This is when food stalls do best and when pickpockets try their luck. You take your customary stroll with guards in tow, not to intimidate, but to subtly remind everyone whose name is carved into the granite arch at the village gate. A merchant offers you a bite of dried figs. Imported, expensive. You take one nod approvingly and keep walking. That fig cost more than a day's wage for some of the peasants here, but again, not your problem. You're here to smile, wave, and be the symbol of well-structured opportunity. And to make a little coin while doing absolutely nothing, which is frankly an art form. In a corner, a cloth vendor is haggling with a pair of nuns over wool prices. You watch with mild interest. Eventually, she folds and throws in a scrap of linen for free. Charity, she mutters. You smirk. Tax deductible, you whisper, not that anyone knows what that means. One historian once claimed that markets were the medieval engine of social mobility. Another argued they were just a way for lords to siphon peasant energy into gold. Both are right. You've seen a stable boy become a seller of beeswax candles. You've also seen him evicted when he couldn't pay stall fees. Balance, you tell yourself. Everything is balance. Later, under a shaded awning, you sip lukewarm ale and discuss tariffs with your steward. There's talk of increasing tolls on outside merchants. But gently you say, just enough to remind them they're guests. He nods, scribbling a note. Somewhere down the line, this will mean more velvet in your wardrobe and fewer coins in a barrel maker's purse. The system works. You end the day with a final sweep of the square. The vendors are packing up. The ground is a mess of hay breadcrumbs and crushed dignity. A jester trips into a cart of apples. Laughter erupts. After, someone sings off-key. The air smells like mud and success. Back at your manor, the treasury clerk reports earnings. Not bad for a day of waving and fig sampling. And as the sun dips behind the hills, you allow yourself a grin. Feudal wealth isn't loud or flashy, it's patient. It's the kind of wealth that trickles in slowly with every market bell and goose squawk. The kind that lets you rule from a bench with a wine cup instead of a battlefield. And you've mastered it. You wake to the scent of beeswax and ink, a sure sign your scribes have been busy overnight. That can only mean one thing: land transfers, rental updates, and maybe, if you're lucky, a juicy inheritance dispute. Feudal landlords like you don't just rake in profits from crops and markets. No, the real wealth lives in scrolls and seals, in the inked lines of contracts so dense they could double as bedtime stories for the legal-minded. You trudge to your solar, the manor's private study and sunroom, where light filters through stained glass in a kaleidoscope of judgmental colors. There your steward awaits, half buried in a pile of parchment. "Good morning, my lord." He mumbles, eyes twitching from a night of estate math. "We've got a few matters to discuss. The first scroll he unfurls is a beauty, a land lease from 2 villages away. The tenant wants 30 acres for sheep grazing, and in exchange he's offering 12 fat lambs a year and exclusive cheese rights." You lean back, considering. Sheep mean wool, wool means textile taxes, and that means more coin without so much as lifting a finger. You nod. Approved, but stipulate he builds a fence. "I won't have woolly invaders. This is the power of ownership. You don't farm, you own the thing that makes farming possible. And every legal transaction becomes another brick in your empire." Historians still argue whether lords truly understood the long-term legal implications of these contracts, or if they just like stamping things with their wax seal. You absolutely love stamping things. Your steward continues. "There's also a dowry claim. Lady Beatrice insists she was promised the mill pond in her marriage contract." You snort. "She was promised ducks." "That's not the same." The steward hesitates. "She's threatening to involve the bishop." You sigh, already mentally calculating how many barrels of ale it would take to pacify a minor ecclesiastical crisis. Next, a village priest seeks permission to build a chapel on your land. Technically, it's for the glory of God. Practically, it's an investment. Chapels draw people. People need food, housing, candles, and you just happen to own the bakery, the cottages, and 3 beekeepers. You agree, of course, but insist the chapel roof be tiled with slate from your quarry. Divine synergy. While you're reviewing a cattle ownership dispute, 1 cow, 2 claimants, both equally confused, you catch yourself chuckling. This is what makes feudal wealth so quietly absurd. You don't just own land. You own everything around it, too. The roads, the wells, the gossip. If a blacksmith sneezes in your jurisdiction, you can probably collect rent on the air. A visiting monk brings more documents, a long-forgotten agreement involving fishing rights and an overly ambitious bridge. Apparently, your great-uncle allowed a merchant family to fish on your riverbank until such a time as the sun no longer shines. You frown. That's dangerously vague. You amend it with a clause unless otherwise taxed. Their problem solved. Later that day, a tenant arrives to renew his farm lease. He brings a goose as tribute, which honks aggressively at your scribe. You pretend not to laugh. The man bows. "My lord, the fields are fair and my crops are sound." You ask if he's rotated them this year because, yes, you know about soil exhaustion now. "Yes, oats, then barley," he says proudly. You nod approvingly. "Excellent. Tell the village healer to keep an eye on you." Healthy tenants grow fat tithes. There's a strange moment just after lunch where you find yourself wondering if you've become more paper than person. Your hands smell faintly of vellum. Your dreams last night were in Latin. You shake it off with a stretch and a sip of weak wine. After all, this is what being a proper feudal landlord requires: control not just of property but of the terms on which others live. You return to the document pile. A merchant wants a permit to establish a roadside inn. Another wants to run barges on your river. A widow is petitioning to keep her late husband's tools technically your property so she can train her son. You approve with a gentle note that he'll owe you an apprenticeship tax when the time comes. Fair is fair. One particularly odd parchment details a pig dispute in a forest clearing. They claim the pig is clairvoyant, your steward says deadpan. You raise an eyebrow. Charge it double, then you reply. It knows what's coming. Evening falls and you're still not done. The last scroll is sealed in red wax urgent. It's from your cousin asking for mediation in a border spat over a hill so small it doesn't even cast a shadow. You chuckle. Tell him he can have it, but he must plant 3 oaks on it. I want bird song when I pass through. This is the brilliance of your position. War is messy, uncertain. But contracts. Contracts endure. You can pass them down, stack them high, and sleep soundly knowing your legacy is scrawled in clauses and margins. As you tuck the final scroll into the coffer, your steward sighs. You know some say land is power. You nod. But the right to write about land, you say with a smirk. That's pure profit. You wake up the next day to the sound of hooves clopping lazily in the courtyard. A merchant caravan has arrived. Not raiders, not beggars, actual trade partners draped in garish silks and trailing behind them the smell of cinnamon sheep and overly optimistic accounting. You peer from your window as they begin to unload crates of dried figs and sheaves of wool that don't look nearly as fluffy as promised. Still, it's a good day, because as a feudal lord, you know this trade makes your wallet fatter without ever making your sword heavier. By mid-morning, you're sitting across from the caravan leader, a wiry man with stained fingers and a smile that could charm the bark off a tree. He wants to renew his license to use your toll bridge. The same toll bridge your grandfather built 3 generations ago and has paid for itself 50 times over. You lean forward, sipping watered wine. Same fee as last year, you say casually. Plus 10 barrels of salted fish. He grimaces. Fish are scarce. You nod solemnly. So is bridge maintenance. Trade rights tariffs, toll roads, and market stalls. This is the kind of warfare you prefer, the kind that ends in parchment and handshakes, not blood and broken mail. Historians still debate whether lords in your time fully grasped the long-term leverage of controlling crossroads and river ports, or if they were just accidentally rich thanks to geography. You know exactly what you're doing. You stroll down to your weekly market. The smells hit you first. Roasting meat, beeswax, churned butter, something that might be soap. You watch as peasants haggle over onions and a wool merchant lays out bolts of fabric on your table. Well, technically his table, but he pays you rent, so it's yours in spirit. You pocket a copper from his voluntary contribution box. Nothing's quite so voluntary under your roof. A tanner approaches cap in hand. "My lord, I'd like to expand my stall." You ask with what he beams. "Rabbit pelts, very popular with visiting monks." You smirk. "As long as it doesn't smell like your last booth, you've got a deal." You don't need to be an expert in leather to know that one stinking hide can chase away a dozen paying customers. Landlords must think like landlords and like tourists. A friar buys cumin from a spice trader who then turns and offers you a pouch as a gift. "A token of good favor," he says, bowing. You examine the fine powder. Could be spice, could be sand. Doesn't matter. He's rented 2 stalls and his donkeys haven't trampled anything. He's golden. Near the well, you catch a bard playing an out-of-tune lute. He's singing about a war you vaguely remember being a part of. You miss the best part. You mutter as you pass. He changes the lyrics instantly, inserting your name and heroic deeds that definitely didn't happen. You flip him a coin anyway. You're not paying for truth. You're paying for ambiance. Midday arrives and with it a tax collector. He's here to count the scales, to weigh the grains, to ensure every merchant pays their due. Not everyone is thrilled. One fishmonger starts arguing about eels. They're slippery, he insists. Hard to count. You raise an eyebrow. Then sell less slippery things. The man grumbles but forks over his eel fee. Back at the manor, you meet with your steward and review today's toll income. It's decent, not stunning, but enough to buy 2 barrels of imported wine or a modest bribe for the bishop's nephew. You consider both. Your steward suggests investing in a second market day. The village is growing, he says. More traders, more coins, more foot traffic. You nod, and more reasons to raise stall fees. Outside, 2 children try to sell pebbles painted like saints. One looks suspiciously like your cousin. You buy it anyway. You're a businessman, but not without whimsy. As evening sets in, a messenger arrives from a neighboring manor. They want to establish a joint caravan route, shared patrols, coordinated fees, maybe even a standardized toll rate. Revolutionary. You scratch your chin, agree you say. But only if we get naming rights. The toll of good fortune has a lovely ring to it. By torchlight, you walk the market path once more. Merchants are packing up, peasants are counting pennies, and somewhere in the distance a goat is trying to eat a ledger. The life of trade is not glamorous, but it is dependable. And more importantly, it's scalable. You pause at the edge of the square, watching your little economy wind down for the night. No battles won, no enemies slain, but 10 new permits signed, 4 tolls collected, and a full chest of coins in your study. You smile. This is how you build wealth that lasts 1 pouch, 1 stall, 1 toll at a time. And maybe, just maybe, 1 painted pebble saint for good luck. You wake early the next morning to the earthy scent of freshly upturned soil and the soft thud of hooves outside your window. Today's not about markets or tolls. Today is all about land, your most valuable, stubborn, unpredictable source of wealth. You pull on your tunic, a fine wool number dyed with woad, and lace up your boots. Time to inspect your fief. Outside your reeve, a man with more opinions than teeth waits with a list. The west fields are damp, he mutters. The oxen are sluggish and the new plow's wheel cracked. You sigh, already missing the predictability of counting toll coins. Land doesn't lie, but it sure does sulk. You mount your horse and begin your circuit. First, stop the barley fields. A pair of serfs trudge behind a wooden plow, mud coating their ankles. One sneezes violently, not on the barley you call gently. The other grins. He's just trying to irrigate. You chuckle. That's 1 extra ale token for wit. As you survey the crops, the reeve notes that some strips are underperforming. Might be the weather, he says, or the soil. You nod solemnly as though you're deeply knowledgeable about soil acidity. Truth is, you rely heavily on trial error and the occasional prayer to Saint Isidore. You ride farther, passing the dairy pens. A cow stares at you with unsettling intensity. That's Matilda, the reeve says. She kicks. You step back. No argument here. One kick from Matilda and you'd be telling this story from a cloud. You stop at the orchard apples mostly, though one rebellious tree insists on producing pears. That one was planted by the old lord, the reeve explains. We've been trying to convince it it's an apple ever since. You nod. A metaphor for half my relatives. You break midday bread with your shepherds who've erected a crude lean-to near the hill. Their lunch consists of hard cheese onions and a stew with questionable ingredients. You politely decline the stew but accept the cheese. How's the wool yield, you ask, between chews? Better, they say. Except for that one ewe that thinks she's a dog. You don't press further. Historians still debate whether feudal lords like you truly understood the complexity of managing mixed-use estates, or simply relied on generations of accumulated peasant know-how. You like to think you strike a delicate balance between enlightened oversight and well-timed nodding. You stop by the fish ponds next. They shimmer in the afternoon light, deceptively tranquil. A boy casts a net and hauls in half a boot. We think there's a pike down there, someone says ominously. The size of a hound. You file that under problems for next week. Back at the mill, the miller's wife corners you with complaints about weevils in the flour and ghosts in the attic. Could be the same thing, you murmur. She doesn't laugh. You make a mental note to offer a ghost-related tax exemption next quarter. You pass by a small garden where the reeve's daughter is growing medicinal herbs. That one cures headaches, she says, pointing to a leafy stem. And that one makes your tongue fall asleep. You nod already, thinking of 5 people you'd like to serve it to at your next feast. Late in the afternoon, you gather your tenants in the manor's outer yard. It's time for the annual redistribution of strips, part of your open field system. Each family gets a share rotated yearly to keep things fair and arguments loud. You stand as names are called, plots assigned, and muttered curses exchanged. This is democracy feudal style, heavily moderated by your mood. Someone tries to bribe the reeve with a pie. It works. You don't even intervene. You just ask for a slice. As the sun sinks, you walk your boundaries one last time. Stones mark the edges, moss-covered and chipped. You remember when a neighboring lord tried to move one a few feet east. That led to a boundary feud that ended with both sides agreeing to duel, using poetry. Your side lost, but you gained 3 cows in the settlement, so you called it a win. You pause at the hill overlooking the whole estate. The fields stretch out in patchwork browns and greens, the village smoke curls gently upward, and your peasants, your revenue in boots, head home tired but fed. This land, with all its temper tantrums and moody livestock, is your lifeblood. Not the glitzy fares, not even the gleaming coins. This soil is your foundation. You smile. Tomorrow there'll be more petitions, more complaints, maybe a goose-related incident or two. But for now, you've walked every furrow, counted every sheep, dodged every cow with a grudge. You're not just a landlord. You're a gardener of the long game. Morning fog hugs the fields as you step onto the damp stones of your estate's storage cellar, torch in hand. Today is tally day, when all that barley wool, saltfish, and miscellaneous goat parts get counted, weighed, logged, and possibly argued over. You might not swing a sword for glory, but these ledgers, these are your battlefield, and your quill is mighty if a bit squeaky. You duck inside. The cold hits first, then the smell like aged cheese wrapped in mildew and ambition. A pair of clerks are already hard at work, hunched over wax tablets and parchment scrolls. One of them sneezes directly into the ink pot. That's a loss, he mutters. Ink or dignity, you ask? He's unsure. The inventory begins. First grain, Massive sacks line the stone walls like sleepy sentries. Each sack's weight is estimated, adjusted, and recorded in your great book of stuff, as you affectionately call it. Historians still argue whether these record books were genuinely accurate or mostly wishful thinking in Latin. Judging by the suspiciously round numbers, you're leaning toward the latter. Next, livestock tallies. You step out into the stable yard. Chickens peck at your boots. The steward approaches with his annual rant. We've lost 6 pigs, 2 hens, and a donkey with boundary issues. You raise an eyebrow. Boundary issues. He keeps visiting the bishop's garden, the steward sighs. Eats the roses, the bishop is displeased. You make a note, donkey diplomacy required. You count sheep, or try to. They're more cooperative when sleeping, which ironically helps no one but your insomniac cousin. A quirky tidbit, one of the rams is blind but leads the flock flawlessly. The shepherd insists the others just follow his confidence. You briefly consider appointing him to your council. Wool bundles are weighed and measured next. A clerk mutters something about shrinkage. It's the humidity, he adds defensively. You nod even though you're not entirely sure if wool shrinks in storage or if that's just medieval wishful thinking. Either way, it's marked down as adjusted for atmospheric humors. The wine cellar now, there's a stop worth savoring. You descend the narrow staircase, trailing your fingers along the damp walls. Watch your head, someone warns just as you don't. A solid thunk later, you arrive blinking. Rows of barrels rest like aging secrets. A sample is drawn. The steward swirls it, sniffs theatrically, and sips. Notes of oak, despair, and turnip. You take a sip. Could be worse, you say. Could be last year's vintage. That one tasted like regret. You check the saltfish barrels. One lid creaks open, revealing a silvery pile of tightly packed salty mackerel. A fringe rumor floats around the manor that saltfish keeps best when sung to. You give it a hum. The clerk pretends not to notice. In the granary, a mouse darts across your path. That's Gerald, a boy says cheerily. He's been here since spring. Friend or foe, you ask. Depends on your opinion of oats, he grins. You sigh. Gerald's rent is overdue. Back at the main hall, you gather all the tallies. Everything's entered meticulously into your parchment scrolls, which you roll up with great ceremony and place into your leather document chest. Then the final touch, your seal. A glob of beeswax, a quick press of your signet ring, and voila, legitimacy in squishy form. You take a moment to admire your work. These numbers, these goods, these dusty corners, this is your empire. Not built on conquests or crusades, but on knowing exactly how many turnips you have, where they're stored, and which cousin accidentally borrowed your best bucket. You hold a short audit court. Tenants approach with minor disputes. He stole my onions, her goose won't stop honking through mass. The cider press is haunted again. You mediate with grace sarcasm and once a firm tap with your tally stick. Later, you walk through the storage barns as dusk settles in. The scent of grain and hay is oddly comforting. These aren't treasures in the traditional sense, but they're the reason your household runs. Gold may glitter, but it can't feed a village. Unless you melt it into spoons, but that seems inefficient. You recall one eccentric lord who insisted on counting everything himself. Took him a month, lost 3 pounds in a bet. You prefer delegation with a healthy dose of lurking supervision? The final ledger is complete. You sit back with your feet on a crate of dried beans, torchlight flickering off the parchment in your hands. Another tally season survived, and despite the mildew, the sneezing clerks, the ambitious mouse, and the haunted cider press, you feel oddly proud. This is wealth feudal style. Not flashy, not heroic, but counted, stacked, and sealed in wax. You rise the next morning to the soft rumble of carts in the distance. Trade day. The manor's great courtyard is beginning to buzz like a beehive after someone poked it with a stick made of opportunity and damp wool. You peer out the window and spot the first merchants rolling in, one with salt, one with tin, and one whose cart smells so strongly of garlic it might count as a weapon. Feudal wealth wasn't just grown, it was traded, borrowed, bartered, and sometimes accidentally stolen. Today you put on your best, not quite washed tunic and prepare to talk shop. Because if you want to grow rich in this age, you need more than cows and coin. You need partners. Preferably ones who aren't trying to shortchange you with moldy cheese. You step out into the morning sun and wave to Sir Reginald, a neighboring minor lord with a mustache so stiff it might be armored. Swapping cider for flax today, you ask. Cider and flattery, he replies, raising a brow. Both potent when properly aged. You're not sure if that was a threat, but you note it down mentally as Reginald's still weird. The courtyard is filled with noise, clattering hooves, shouts in 3 dialects, and someone singing off-key about sausages. You move from stall to stall, inspecting goods. Cloth from Flanders, glazed pottery from across the channel, even some strange dried fruit, allegedly from the edge of the known world. Probably just fancy raisins. Still, you try one. Tastes like adventure and mild disappointment. You meet with your reeve near the granary doors where the trade records are kept. Each exchange is logged carefully, cross-referenced against the manor's supply needs and double-checked by a boy whose job is to catch lying eyes. Historians still debate whether such clerks were truly effective or just enjoyed the excuse to stare intensely at people's noses. You overhear 2 peasants arguing over a cartload of hay and intervene just in time to prevent a full-scale pitchfork duel. Your judgment: split the hay, share the blame, and next time write things down. They grumble but obey. You suspect they'll become best friends again by sunset, or arch-nemesis. With peasants, it's a 50-50 shot. One merchant catches your eye, a wiry man selling salt blocks and mysterious powders. You raise an eyebrow. What's that green stuff? He leans in and whispers, ground nettle, good for boils and boredom. You buy 2 pouches, not because you need nettle, but because boredom is a real threat. The wool merchants arrive next, looking smug as usual. You haggle over prices, trade a few barrels of cider, and toss in a piglet with an attitude problem. The merchants seem pleased. The piglet less so. It squeals its way onto the cart, flailing like it knows it's being exported for attitude adjustment. A fringe economic practice, you secretly enjoy the symbolic barter. Every so often, a noble will gift something extremely valuable, a hunting falcon, say, in exchange for another gift of equalish value, like an ornate saddle or 15 geese in coordinated hats. These trades aren't about profit, they're about ego. You consider gifting your prized turnip sculpture to Reginald, just to see what he does. Back in your hall, you host the final trade council. Merchants present their wares, scribes jot down numbers, and you sip weak ale while mentally calculating how many sacks of rye equal 1 regrettable tapestry. Your steward leans in to whisper, "We're getting a good deal on timber this year." "Any ghosts in the beams?" you ask dryly. "Only small ones," he grins. "Nothing louder than a mouse choir." As dusk falls, the last wagons roll out and your courtyard empties into silence. Well, almost. A leftover juggler is still spinning cabbages for no apparent reason. You leave him to it. Everyone needs a passion. You return to your chamber and glance over the day's records. Your manor's wealth has grown not through conquest or war, but through beans and wool, whispers and trades, and knowing exactly which merchant sells cinnamon that smells suspiciously like bark. This kind of wealth isn't flashy. It's not the stuff of epic songs or stained glass windows, but it's real. Solid, tally-marked and wax-sealed. The kind of wealth that lets your people eat through winter and keeps your manor roof from leaking into the soup pot. You stretch, yawn, and smile. Maybe you didn't conquer a kingdom, but you got a whole cart of garlic, 6 sacks of barley, and a story about a nettle salesman that'll make excellent dinner conversation. Not bad for a day without a single sword swing. The next morning greets you not with sunlight, but with parchment. Lots of it. Your steward is waiting in the doorway before you've even had your morning cider, holding a stack of scrolls tied with increasingly desperate-looking ribbons. It's time, he says solemnly, to review the debts. You groan not out of laziness, but because medieval accounting is less math and more medieval performance art. You gesture for him to follow you to the hall, where you settle into your not entirely comfortable lordly chair. The fire crackles. The steward unrolls the first scroll. You sigh. It begins. Let's talk about medieval debts, because feudal lords didn't just hoard coin and grain. They borrowed, lent, bartered, and sometimes found themselves deeply entangled in what can only be described as financial fan fiction. You're currently owed 12 goats from a knight who moved to Burgundy, 300 turnips from a monastery that now grows only onions, and one flute-playing boy from a bard who misunderstood loan in a very creative way. Historians still debate whether medieval credit was formalized or just wishful thinking dressed in Latin. But what's clear is that everything from marriages to sheep was fair game for an IOU. Your own ledgers contain not just quantities, but also peculiarities. 1 jug of honey. If the bee season prospers, 4 days' labor from a man named Osric, who limps but is very strong, and a sack of oats, but only if my daughter marries well. You lean over the scrolls with your steward scratching your head at the ink blots and notes. Did we ever collect on this cart of eels from the bishop, you ask? The bishop claimed divine right of eel refusal, the steward replies deadpan. You pause. Is that a real thing? No, he says. But he's a bishop, so who's going to argue? You send a rider to gently nudge some of the more outstanding debtors. Not with threats, those are reserved for bandits, but with awkwardly worded reminders. Dear Sir Geoffrey, we hope your recent harvest was bountiful. Speaking of bounty, might we collect the 4 pigs and 1 harp you pledged last Pentecost? You've learned that politeness and thinly veiled guilt can work wonders. There's also the matter of your own debts. You borrowed a significant sum of cheese from the local abbey during last year's drought. In return, you promised favorable tithe terms and first pick of your orchard apples. You've kept your end of the bargain. Mostly, except for the pears. You ate the pears. They were excellent, a quirky twist in feudal finance. Sometimes entire villages were put up as collateral. That's right, lords would borrow funds, and if they couldn't repay the lender, got temporary control over a village. Imagine losing a village over gambling debts. Sorry, peasants, you now report to Lord Barnaby. Try not to anger him, he's fond of singing to geese. You look through the ledger's creative repayment section. 1 knight repaid a debt in barrels of singing crickets. Another pledged to perform a comedic monologue at your next feast. You suspect they were stalling, but who's to say laughter isn't currency? Some would argue it's more valuable than goats, especially when goats escape and eat the tapestries. Then there are the familial debts, the dowries promised, the lands lent during wedding alliances, the awkward promises that seemed clever at the time but now read like elaborate traps. You once agreed to gift a cousin's wife a swan every solstice. She moved to Norway. Swans don't do well in shipping crates. You've resorted to sending elaborate sketches. Your steward frowns. We're also still waiting on Lord Alric's chest of foreign silver, which may or may not exist. You raise an eyebrow, may or may not. He described it as invisible but real. Ah, an imaginary treasure chest. That old trick. You consider forgiving some debts, not out of mercy but strategy. A generous lord inspires loyalty. Plus, chasing a man for a decade-old promise of a spiced ham isn't the best use of your rider's time. You declare a jubilee of pork. All ham-related debts under 5 years old are hereby forgiven. The steward records this with an amused smirk. As the morning wanes, you find yourself oddly amused by the entire process. Debts tell stories. They're not just about money. They're snapshots of desperate summers, overambitious trades, and grand gestures gone sideways. Like the time you promised a bard 10 groats if he could rhyme ferret with merit convincingly. He did. You paid. No regrets. A sudden knock interrupts your scroll-filled trance. A young lad enters with a note. From the baker, my lord. He offers 4 loaves in advance if we grant him another barrel of yeast. You nod, tell him he has a deal and that he should bake those loaves extra crusty. The lad nods and sprints off. Microloans Medieval Edition. You pause to gaze out the window. The manor grounds are busy but peaceful. This system of trade, debt, promise, and quiet trust, it's how you've built your wealth. Not from plunder or bloodshed, but from the slow accumulation of relationships. Each debt is a thread, and you, whether you meant to be or not, are the weaver. You lean back satisfied. The debts may not all be paid, but they're remembered, and in this world memory is sometimes more valuable than coin. You rise from the hall and step into the gentle late afternoon sun. There's still work to do, because if debts tell stories, then your land writes the headlines. You're due for an inspection of your estate's farmlands, which is either a moment of satisfaction or another reminder of how little actual control you have over pig's weather and people named Cedric who are always up to something. Estate management, after all, is the invisible engine behind your wealth. No matter how glamorous a feast might look or how intimidating your sword collection seems, the real riches lie in barley fields, sheep meadows, and well-timed manure. And let's be honest, you've got strong opinions about manure placement. That's the sort of lord you are. You mount your horse, not your fanciest charger, but your everyday. I'm checking the crop steed named Turnip and head out. As you trot past the orchard, you nod at the workers pruning branches. One of them coughs and offers a half wave. That's Godric. Good worker. Terrible liar. Probably hiding a cider still in the shed again. The first stop is the barley fields. They stretch out in neat rows, glistening under the sun. A steward assigned to this area bows deeply. My lord, we've seen good yields. Slight beetle infestation near the creek, but nothing unmanageable. You dismount and walk among the stalks, brushing your fingers against them. Let's not repeat last year's beetle drama, you say. You remember the screaming and the bees. There's something grounding about walking your land. Here you can see the real source of your income. It's not the taxes, which are wildly unreliable, nor the tolls, which are only collected when someone feels like standing by the road. It's the harvest. And with good planning, decent rain, and perhaps a sacrificial bread loaf to the harvest gods, you'll stay rich another year. You pass the sheep pens next. A flock of fluffy opportunists bleats in your direction, assuming you're there with snacks. You're not. But you do give them a nod of approval. Wool's been a dependable trade good. Historians still argue whether wool or wine made the biggest impact on feudal economies, but in your case, wool wins by a fleece. There's an odd little side note in your accounts too, the occasional owl fee. Turns out a nearby village pays you annually in dried fish to allow an owl to nest in one of your barns. He brings luck, they insist. You allow it mostly because you like the idea of charging rent to an owl. That, and the owl's name is Reginald. You don't argue with a bird that stares like that. Up the hill, the dairy shed hums with low voices and clanking pails. You duck inside and greet the milkmaids. Butter production's been strong. Last year's innovation, storing the milk in cool cave nooks, actually worked, reducing spoilage. You made the head dairy woman a small pendant for the idea, and now everyone calls her Lady Cream. You suspect she likes it. You ask after the cows. Mild mostly comes the reply. Except Geraldine. She kicked a monk again. You sigh. Why is she always near monks? They walk slowly. The milkmaid explains as if that settles it. You make a mental note to add a cow diplomacy line to your estate duties. The wind shifts. You smell smoke. Not bad smoke, cooking smoke. You follow your nose to a small tenant farm where an elderly couple is roasting something over a fire. My lord, they say, startled. You smile. Just passing through, smells excellent. They nod relieved and offer you a baked root vegetable wrapped in leaves. You accept. It's warm, earthy, and utterly delicious. Riches aren't always gold. Sometimes they're roasted turnips with salt. Then there are the water rights. You ride toward the stream that borders your eastern fields. A dispute has been brewing literally between two villages about who can draw water when. Your job as lord is to arbitrate this in a way that feels fair and ensures nobody curses your name during winter festivals. You hold a quick council. One side brings a goose as a gift, the other offers songs. You settle it diplomatically by suggesting they alternate days and keep the goose. Historians still debate how much control feudal lords really had over daily village life. On paper, you're omnipotent. In practice, you're somewhere between a mediator and an exhausted parent. Your job is to keep things running just well enough that people don't revolt or move. That's the balance. Not glory, not grandeur, just continuity. As evening creeps in, you arrive at the apiary. Bees hum peacefully around their hives. You've grown fond of this corner of your estate. The bees ask no questions, require no riddles, and do not sing ballads about questionable conquests. They just make honey. You inhale deeply. Sweet floral warm. Honey is one of your few luxuries that feels both decadent and honest. Your apiarist waves. The bees are doing well. A few were seen chasing the brewer again, but no stings. They like his hat, you say with a nod. We all do. You make a mental tally of your estate's standing barley healthy sheep, fluffy cows, mildly violent bees triumphant. You may not have won any wars this year, but you're wealthy in the things that actually matter. Land, labor, livestock, peace. You head home as dusk paints the sky in dusty orange. Your horse Turnip seems equally ready for supper. You pat his neck and mutter, "Good work today, old friend. We only had to dodge one argument and 3 angry chickens." You dismount as you reach the manor gates. Another day tending the true roots of your fortune, furry, leafy buzzing and slightly chaotic, has passed. And as unglamorous as it sounds, this is the part of lordship that keeps everything from collapsing. Not the crown, not the sword, but the soil. You wake the next morning to the clink of a spoon against a ceramic cup, your steward delivering your barley tea. It's bland, slightly gritty, and probably more symbolic than nutritional, but you drink it anyway. A feudal lord must start the day grounded in the taste of his own harvest, or so you tell yourself. The truth is you're out of imported cinnamon and your spice merchant hasn't shown up since the goose incident. You don't ask. Today's ledger day. That's not a thrilling phrase unless you're particularly fond of Roman numerals and dubious arithmetic, but it's vital. Wealth doesn't just stack itself. You shuffle into your small study lit by one dusty window and candles that smell vaguely of mutton fat. The steward lays out the records, parchments, wax seals, and a nervous little abacus. You glance at the first entry, tenant fee, widow Agnes. Paid in eels. Of course. Again, you sigh and scribble a note. Accept if fresh trade for onions if possible. This is shockingly a common situation. Barter is alive and thriving across your lands. People rarely have coins. They have livestock, cloth bundles of herbs, and the occasional rare delight like duck eggs wrapped in moss. You move through the entries. Your baker pays in bread. Your blacksmith offers horseshoe repairs. One fellow has attempted to pay his rent with riddles 3 years in a row. He thinks this is charming. It is not. But his riddles are oddly specific and occasionally helpful. Last year's "What cannot be held but binds the most" ended up printed on the side of your granary. Answer a vow. Kind of sweet, actually. Not everything in the ledger is quaint. Some entries sting. Roof repairs, South Hall, collapse due to thatch rot, lost 3 sheep, possible wolf activity. Wine barrel burst, mold inside. These are losses, slow leaks in the bucket of your fortune. You tally them, adjust, and try not to sigh too loudly. One curious note catches your eye. Visiting friar traded relic for hay and soup. You raise a brow. The relic in question appears to be a finger bone, allegedly from St. Rufus of the Unwashed. You smell a scam. Literally, the bone reeks of something mineral and unsettling. Still, you allow it to be stored. Why? Because peasants love relics. They come to stare, to whisper prayers, and while they're there, they buy candles. Welcome to passive income medieval style. You take a break from the parchments to walk the hall. A minstrel hired last month is singing about a heroic cabbage. You make a note to reduce his pace slightly. Outside, your steward follows, updating you on taxes. Collections from Hilltop Village are delayed, my lord, he mutters. Their headman insists the stream now runs backwards, and this must be interpreted as an omen. You blink. Of what he didn't specify, my lord. Possibly taxes. You nod sagely. We'll send a wise woman to declare the stream spiritually neutral. That's your strategy now, appease superstition with more elaborate superstition. It often works better than swords. A tax cart arrives around noon. A pair of oxen trudge in hauling crates of turnips, honey, and 1 crate of frogs. You stare. The driver shrugs. They said they're for the moat. Keep the bugs down. You eye the frogs. One blinks at you like a sassy little tax accountant. Fine, you mutter, but label them this time. Historians still debate how much of a feudal lord's wealth came from actual coins versus stuff like this rugsweed, a goat named Buttercup who just wandered into your courtyard and now refuses to leave. In truth, your wealth is less like a bank vault and more like a pile of very determined barter items stacked in a corner of a barn. You stop by the storehouse next. The steward walks you through inventory: 3 barrels of mead, 12 sacks of flour. 1 missing sack of flour we suspect went to the miller's cousin. Is this the cousin who allegedly built a windmill out of spoons, you ask? Yes, my lord. It fell down. Tragic, you murmur. You inspect your ale stock. It's modest this season. Last year's surplus let you trade with a nearby castle for bricks. Now your southern tower leans slightly less. These quiet exchanges of goods between estates are the lifeblood of noble finance. No battles, no banners, just beer for bricks and honey for hinges. It's time for the monthly coin count. You sit in the solar with a tiny locked chest. When opened, it reveals 43 silver pieces, 29 copper bits, and 1 mystery token from a tavern you've never visited. You jingle them. It's not much, but it's yours. Real coin is precious and rare. Most of your subjects haven't held silver in years. Still, with these few coins and your mountain of frog crates, you're considered wealthy. You own land. People obey you. When your cloak billows in the wind, it billows with purpose. And yet you also spend hours counting eggs and arguing over beet tax. That's the secret no one tells you about being a feudal lord. It's a business. A chaotic, leafy mooing business. A fringe theory among some scholars suggests that the most successful lords were the ones who behaved more like merchants than knights. You believe it. Your best investments weren't swords, they were silos. As the sun dips low, you step outside, gazing over your manor's fields, livestock, and very confused frogs. The wealth of your world isn't in gold coins, it's in trust and labor and knowing which sheep belong to whom and which herbs sell best at the next village fair. It's humble, it's uneven, and it's working. You settle into the creaky chair by your bedroom window, ledger closed, cloak folded, candle sputtering low. The day's reckoning is complete. Outside, the wind carries the faint bleating of sheep and a whisper of music, probably the cabbage minstrel again, still at it. You can't bring yourself to tell him to stop. Let the man sing. Tonight you're thinking about what it all adds up to. Not the crates of onions or the cracked relics or even the slippery frogs that probably escaped and are forming a union in the moat. No, what actually matters is control. That's how you got rich, if you want to call it that. Not conquest, not glory. Control over production, control over who gets to bake bread, fish rivers, cut trees. Every fire that warms a peasant hut owes a tiny thanks to your careful regulation of the surrounding forest. You look at your hands, not calloused, not bloodied. Soft hands made wealthy by the labor of others and by rules. So many rules, and sometimes loopholes in those rules. Historians still argue whether feudal lords truly believed in divine right, or whether it was just the world's most convenient multi-generational tax scam. Either way, it worked. When your tenants paid in potatoes, you got rich. When a bridge was built and you slapped a toll on it, you got richer. When a widow couldn't pay in coin but offered to weave 6 cloaks by winter, you became warmer, wealthier, and maybe even a little kinder, if only for a moment. You remember one peasant family who brought a different gift each year. Once it was a cured ham. Once it was a wooden flute. Once it was a tiny carved animal that looked suspiciously like you down to the skeptical eyebrows. You still keep it by your bed. Not because you're sentimental, of course, just because it's well balanced. Good craftsmanship, that's all. Your actual coin pile never grew enormous. You didn't retire on a mountain of gold, but you had power, influence, and a startling number of cabbages. The castle kitchen still can't figure out where they all came from. You rise, stretch, and walk one last round of the estate. Torches flicker by the stable. A scullery boy is scrubbing something unidentifiable out of a cauldron. The air smells of wet hay and old bread. The stars above shimmer like polished pewter. Somewhere far off, a rival lord probably sharpens a sword, dreams of battle. Let him. Because the real power, it's here in the ledgers, in the fields, in the knowledge that your next harvest is already planted, your tenants, though occasionally, odd, still loyal, and your frogs, unusually productive. And now, let's slow everything down. Let your feet stop moving. Let your thoughts soften. Let the torchlight fade to warm embers in your imagination. You don't need to plan the next trade balance, the next ledger, or chase down a rogue goat named Pickles who thinks the chapel is his new home. For now, the doors are locked, the fires are low, and your world hums gently in its rhythm. You are not a warrior. You are not a king. But you are most definitely a ruler of rhythms, of grains, of seasonal flows. Let that hum cradle you, like wind in tall grass, like a song sung softly by someone you trust, like the quiet settling of a barn after sundown. Tomorrow the world may wobble again, but tonight everything is where it should be. You're home, you're full, you're at rest. And the frogs, they're probably watching the stars too.